Welcome to Beyond the News. I'm your host Ayesha Khan. In tonight's edition of the program, we will be discussing Sufism is a mystical form of Islam. Nationalist myths have resulted in misconceptions about South Asian history. Modern Iran, a culmination of a rich and illustrious past. But first, our top story tonight. Sufism in modern age. Sufism is a mystical form of Islam, a school of practice that emphasizes the inward search for God and shuns materialism. It has also produced some of the world's most beloved literature, like the poems of the 13th century Iranian jurist Jalaluddin Muhammad Rumi. Therefore, Rumi and his modern-day adherents cherish tolerance and pluralism, qualities that many religions propagate today. However, Sufism, often known as Islamic mysticism, has been widely misunderstood in the modern age. This is because some modern observers proclaim that the effective end of the Sufi orders in the 20th century by mainstream religious parties caused the decline of mystical religious experience, which was deemed incompatible with modernity. Meanwhile, politically motivated Muslims have made Sufism the scapegoat for Islam's alleged backwardness in comparison with the West, claiming that Sufism, as the religion of the common people, embodies superstitions and un-Islamic elements adopted from local customs. Therefore, eradication of Sufism was believed necessary in order for Islam to reclaim to birthright, including modern science and technology. Furthermore, the issue of looking Sufism from a modern Orientalist gaze has posed another problem to how Muslims in the modern age look at Sufi practices. Hence, to discuss both broad trends on modern scholarship of Sufism today, particularly via liberal tradition, we're exclusively joined by Dr. Joanne Gross, who is a professor of history at the College of New Jersey. She is recognized as a renowned historian in the field of Sufi studies. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Gross. So let me begin by asking you, in your opinion, what are the current contemporary and historical trends in scholarship in the field of Sufism?
Well, the study of Sufism has really come into its own, and I think that in a very, remains a lot to be done, but there are several different directions that the study of Sufism is taking now. One is to look beyond a kind of periodization theory, that there were certain developments that took place in certain periods of time, and that there was a formative stage and there was a institutionalized stage and there was then a sort of modernized stage, and that really is being rethought, and rather looking at different comparative examples of different Sufi orders, and also reevaluating the tariqa-based Sufism and communal aspects of Sufism in everyday life, whether it be ritual or practice or authority or leadership or shrine culture, for example. So yes, on the one hand, we still are very concerned with Sufi philosophy and poetry and literary aspects of Sufism, and also the formation of various Sufi communities. But I think the field has expanded quite a bit, and especially in the context of Pakistan, India, Central Asia. And so, in fact, a lot of the studies that were for South Asia really served as a foundation for new understandings of work. The work of Simon Digby and others. So now, I think that largely people are starting to look anew at the socio-political organization, at the esoteric as well as the exoteric side of things, the Zahir and the Batin, that is in Sufism, but also on the ground in actual Sufi communities. So, yes, there is a certain focus on the early formative development of Sufism and Sufi thought, and of course the works of Kushairi and Junaid and others. And then, of course, moving into the next stage. But I think that really a lot has been done in the Eastern Islamic world when it comes to the post-Mongol period.
So could you tell us about Sufi networks that existed for centuries in Central Asia, and they historically have any interactions with the South Asian region or not?
Yes, I mean they're completely connected. And so the movement of people and ideas and communities. And so we have, for example, the Naqshbandiya, we have the Chishtiya, we have the Qadariya, and we have the Yasaviya. Now these were all mainly formed in Central Asia. But the Chishtiya, of course, were present and continue to be present in South Asia. The Naqshbandiya, of course, travels, and actually the Mujaddidiya moved from Central Asia into South Asia and then returned, and was very influenced by what was going on with the Sirhindi movement and others. And you have, so there contacts in terms of trade, contacts in terms of Sufis, of course, themselves always traveled, whether it be for suhbat, whether it be for pilgrimage, and so we always have, and also patronage, and so I think we have a very important interconnections throughout I would say, the Eastern Islamic world, and they continue to exist.
Could you tell us about your publications and your work that you have done, which is grounded in specifically Pakistan and the shrine culture?
My early work was on Khoja Ahrar Vali, whose shrine is in outside of Samarkand. And I published his letters with this Uzbek scholar, Asam Urambayev, and the autographed letters of Khoja Ahrar are in the collection at the Institute of Oriental Studies in Tashkent. And the connections between the sacred landscape and the Sufi communities is very, very strong. And so there are multidimensional aspects of the sacred landscape that I'm interested in. There's an economic side of it. Of course, this is very much the case in urban shrine development, such as Mazar-e-Sharif, or such as here, many cases of that in the Deccan, in the Punjab, in Baluchistan, in Sindh, and of course in the north as well. And so there's I think really important to consider the interconnectedness of these, and also how shrines, how do they come to exist? How does sacred authority and prestige, how does karamat, come to be, in a way, concretized really in a shrine? And what functions does the shrine have in a local context? And the idea of pilgrimage, and how that is there. But the work that I'm doing now is on the Pamir, and I initially started to work on shrines in Tajikistan in general, because there's very little work that's been done on shrine culture in Tajikistan. And one of my main reasons for doing it was to decenter the notion of just the urban shrine as being the paradigm. Because of course we have very important studies that have been done on many different Sufi shrines in Pakistan, in India, in Iran, in Central Asia. But fewer studies have been done on local shrines and the whole culture of local shrines, and the building of them, the relationship between the community and shrines, and also one of the things I'm very interested in is the relationship between narratives about shrines and the actual physicality of the shrine itself. And so the idea of sacred landscape, the idea of orality as well as textuality when it comes to shrines, because of course hagiography, the tradition of the hagiographical tradition is very strong in Sufism and Sufi studies. And I myself have done a lot of work on the hagiographies of Khoja Ahrar and others. But at the same time, there is the oral culture that has existed, and there's an interplay between that oral culture and what often becomes textualized over time. So I initially started to visit shrines all over Tajikistan, but my main interest really, and that's what I've been working on a big project, the shrines in Badakhshan in Afghanistan and Tajikistan, in Gorno-Badakhshan. There were, and as my work progressed, so I'm an historian, but I also do ethnographic work. And so I combine ethnographic work with historical work, archival sources with local sources. And the more I worked on the shrines, these are the Ismaili shrines in the Pamir in Badakhshan, and the more interviews I conducted at the shrine sites, especially with either awladi, khalifas and pirs there, I began to realize that the Sayyid status and the Sayyid pedigree through the Ansab literature of the genealogical traditions were really essential. So that project now has developed into a project which I'll be talking about tomorrow on the relationship between genealogical histories, the documentary practice of genealogy, and the sacred landscape. And so it's been interesting, and so I've collected through my field work, not collected of course these documents remain in private hands, and but people have been very generous to allow me to look at them and to study them. And so I'm now doing a collaborative project on on genealogical history, and looking at how genealogies represent a certain vision, a certain lineage, but also a certain authority within society. And here's where the interconnectedness comes in, because genealogical traditions move with people. And so, for example, in one of the communities, the town of Zibak in Afghanistan, on the Afghan side, there were many Ismaili peers in the 19th century that left and they went to Gilgit. And you can actually see the interrelationship between some of the nasab-namas that were written in Zibak, and that were written, in fact, we have documents where a sublineage that is actually from Zibaki, Afghanistan, is there. And so I'm very interested in this, in that interconnectedness, in the interregional aspect of Sufism.
So what is the importance of comparative liberal education in Pakistan, and the importance of the scholarship for the youth of the country, as well as a way to provide a counter-narrative to the Orientalized view of Sufism?
Okay, so there are two different questions. First let me talk about comparative liberal studies. We've had some really very fruitful conversations about this. So I would like to just say that I'm really honored to be able to be here to participate in the launch of the Comparative Liberal Studies program at Habib University. And everyone is so enthusiastic here, and I think it offers just tremendous possibilities for studying the interdisciplinary studies, transregional studies, for breaking down really the paradigms, particularly the Western paradigm, of area studies where you compartmentalize ideas. The idea of a Persianate civilizational area, which is not bound by national boundaries, and the idea that there is a certain interconnectedness between societies and cultures, whether not just cultural, but many different levels, and the experience of having a very devoted, fine faculty with experience in interdisciplinary studies, with a vision really to bring students into the 21st century with a new outlook on their own study, and on how that fits in, to the larger framework. So I think it really is a fantastic opportunity. I'm really looking forward to seeing the students and to hearing what they have to say. And I hope that sharing some of my research will allow me to engage in discussions with students and with faculty here.
Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Gross. And once again, that was Joanne Gross discussing Sufism and the launch of the Liberal Arts Studies program here at Habib University. Now let's move on to a quick break. We'll be back with more news. Welcome back. The South Asian region today encompasses 1/4 of the world's population. Modern South Asia comprises of 7 contiguous countries: Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Maldives, Nepal, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka. The region is geographically knit together and is homogeneous in terms of social, cultural, political, historical, and economic factors. Hence, the people of this area are heirs to a heritage of common culture and civilization deeply rooted in history. However, at the beginning of the 21st century, the region became one of the most underdeveloped regions of the world, both educationally and economically. Today, it is considered one of the most poorest regions economically in the world. However, it's not just economy that has been impacted in the region alone. The region has suffered most in the areas of education and literacy. Another problem that plagues the region is hyper-nationalism. This has resulted in conflated historical narratives about the region. Therefore, many historians today complain of lack of local scholarship that highlights this shared past and give examples of the 16th century empires, including Safavid, Mughal, and subsequent local empires, relying upon each other through complex networks of relationships, even when holding enmity towards each other at times. Hence, instead of one-dimensional linear narrative, many scholars urge today people to delve into more about their local histories in order to find examples of coexistence rather than of exclusion. Therefore, to discuss more about the contemporary trends in South Asian history and the state of archival research in the region, we are now joined by renowned historian Dr. Nur Sobers Khan, who is a lead curator of South Asian collections at British Library. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Khan.
Thank you for having me.
What is the importance of comparative liberal education in Pakistan, and how can this education equip the youth for their future careers?
Well, that's a very good question. It's something I imagine that you've probably discussed with my colleagues as well, who are also contributing to the new major. As you probably know, the new major, Comparative Liberal Studies, it's trying to unite philosophy, history, literature, religion, as well as kind of have a practical element that allows the students to engage with cultural heritage on the ground, also with a lived experience of these exact topics. So I think the importance of it is really to reimagine what the humanities can be and what they can be in Pakistan, and to kind of recontextualize what a liberal arts education is and make it very relevant to questions that students might have about the world and their place in it. So in the sense, it can equip you for any career, really. We're often asked, those of us who followed a career in, say, humanities research or arts research, sort of like, oh, well, what are you going to do with that degree? Why didn't you study engineering or medicine? And you can say, well, if you study engineering, you're going to be an engineer. You study medicine, you're going to be a doctor. If you study a topic such as comparative liberal studies, really, the world is your oyster. You can be anything. You'll have a rich imagination and ability to articulate yourself, very good analytical abilities, and have a very firm sense of your place in the world and how to make sense of it. So I would say it really will equip you for any career in any field. So
you have worked as a curator for many leading organizations. Could you highlight the importance of public institutions and curated collections? Because in Pakistan, it seems to have disappeared.
Well, I'm not sure if they've disappeared in Pakistan. I've had the pleasure of working together with a number of very talented researchers, curators, archivists here in Pakistan. I think the knowledge and skills that you have in Pakistan in terms of people who are doing research and working with collections is immense. And the abilities of the people working in that field are truly incredible. I think the issue is just one of resources and support. I mean, if you want to have a successful sort of cultural heritage public institution, be it a library or archive or museum, it needs government support, or it needs private support, it needs resources. So I wouldn't say these institutions have disappeared in Pakistan. Maybe they just need a bit more support so that they can engage a bit more with the public. Certainly there are a number that are already very successfully doing that, but as a field, definitely, I think the skills are there, the talent is there, the knowledge is there. Maybe the institutions themselves perhaps would benefit from financial support really more than anything else.
So I just want to build on what you said. What is the importance of cultural heritage? So what does that mean to you in your research field?
Well, I mean, really, the institutions that I've worked in, I mean, I've worked in universities, but I've also worked in museums and libraries and archives, and those are often referred to as memory institutions. And their job really is to preserve a material memory of a culture or of a place or of a particular time. So I think that the question of cultural heritage, it intersects almost perfectly with the question of memory, and not just preservation of memory, because that's what you would sort of obviously think when you think of history or a cultural heritage institution, but I would argue it's actually the reimagining of memory or reimagining of the past, because if you preserve the material heritage, then it's always there for new researchers, new students, new audiences to engage with and work with and reimagine. So, I mean, I would say that's part of the importance of cultural heritage institutions in preserving, the material remnants of the past that they preserve.
Earlier when I was speaking with Dr. Gross, we were discussing the importance of ethnography. So do you think it is important to have ethnography within your field where you connect narratives with realities?
So I agree. I mean, my own training is as a philologist and a textual scholar, but I have to say that more and more the importance of oral histories is really vital because, I mean, histories are very much lived today. You know, the way that we study something shapes the way that reality actually comes into being, you know. So in taking oral histories, you can also place value on narratives that are otherwise marginalized. So, for instance, if we look at the field of, let's say women's spirituality, for instance, in Sufism, we don't have textual sources, right? But what we have is a lived experience. So you can privilege narratives that otherwise might be marginalized if you're only looking at textual sources, which are very sort of male-oriented. So if you're looking to discover other histories, then I think oral histories are really essential to complement what we have as far as textual and material resources are concerned.
Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Khan. And once again, that was Dr. Nur Sobers Khan. Now let's move on to a quick break. We'll be back with more news. Thank you for staying with us. This history of modern Iran is perhaps more focused on the post-1979 Iranian Revolution today than what was the case in the past. Today, with the rule of Islamic clerics in Islamic Republic of Iran, little is discussed about the illustrious past of the Safavid Empire, which officially brought Shi'ism to the region, and others who subsequently followed them. Therefore, little is discussed about the history of Iran's repressive regime that has been persecuting its population, a notion quite popular in the West. Therefore, if one wants to look at the rich history of the nuanced manner, that one must dive into detail in order to look at how events, people, and institutions have all shaped Iran over subsequent centuries into what it has become today. Interestingly, if one delves more and more into Iranian history, one would realize how connected Iran historically has been with the rest of the world and how it has helped to spread popular ideas around the world, including in its Enlightenment era. Hence, to talk more about modern Iranian history and history of the Iranian people, we have with us our esteemed guest, Mr. Abbas Amanat, who is a professor of history and international studies at Yale University and director of the Yale Program in Iranian Studies at the MacMillan Center for the International and Area Studies. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Amanat.
Okay.
So firstly, how do you assess the contemporary scholarship on Iranian studies post-1979 Iranian Revolution?
Thank you very much. I appreciate the occasion. The field of Iranian studies no doubt has grown substantially since the 1970s for very obvious reasons. For one, demographically, Iran has grown in size. Its population of Iran in the 1970s was something close to 25 million. Now it's about 80 million or 80 more plus population. There are far more many universities than there used to be in the 1960s and 70s. And these universities, for various degrees and different qualities, students in the undergraduate level, in the graduate level, in the doctorate level. Some of them are engaged in Iranian studies within the universities in Iran, some of them outside the universities in research centers and so forth, some of them outside the country. So you see that there is an overlap of the population of scholars coming outside Iran for a variety of reasons, and they settle now virtually in most universities in the United States, in Europe, in Australia, perhaps in other parts of the world as well. You would find a fair number of Iranians or Iran specialists. One should also bear in mind that when we talk about Iranian studies, it's not only Iranians. There are Iranians, there are Europeans, there are Americans, there are people from South Asia, from Pakistan, for instance, who also specialize in fields which in one way or another can be defined as Iranian studies. Because of course the definition of Iranian studies has been, over the years, over the decades, has changed, and it's far broader in its coverage. It does not look at Iran purely as territorial Iran with its boundaries and so forth, but looks at the bigger communities of people who in one way or another are engaged or were engaged in the study of fields related to Persian literature, to a variety of forms that refer to as the Persianate, similar to Persian, but not necessarily in Persian language, such as for instance in Urdu or in Hindi or in a variety of other local dialects in the other countries of the region. So by and large, the field is growing substantially. Publications are very much more than what it used to be in the earlier decades. But the one problem, and that's where I would like to end, is that universities within Iran sometimes are not very free environments, as for instance here in the Habib University, for pursuit of specific aspects of the culture. There are certain control or certain concerns on the side of the authorities, and that has been a drawback for the field.
Your work particularly focuses on Messianic and apocalyptic movements. How do you account for the pervasive Messianic and apocalyptic trends across the Islamic world, especially in Iran and South Asia?
Yes, that's a very important question. Well, to some extent, it is because Iran in particular and the world around Iran, including South Asia, has been a fertile ground because of its long historical and religious preoccupation with issues of the hereafter, with issues of apocalypse, with issues of the emergence of a messianic savior. Shi'ism in particular is a messianic religion. In many respects, you have to look at it as a religion that looks into the distant future for the return of a savior. The same as it's Christianity, or Judaism for that matter. So this is, in the Islamic tradition, within Shi'ism, the idea of a return of a charismatic figure has been always very significantly pronounced, very significantly presented. And therefore, it's not surprising to see that in the Iranian Shi'i world, we see the occurrence of these movements, even in pre-16th century, with the rise of the Shi'i empire in Iran. Even prior to that, with the Ismailis, you can see a very strong messianic trends always was in place. Even in pre-Islamic Iran, Iran has been the land of apocalyptic movements, within Zoroastrian tradition in pre-Islamic Iran, which Parsis in this country are the believers. Also the tradition of messianic coming of the Messiah is also an important feature of their belief system. So I'm not surprised to see that South Asia also has that. because South Asia in many respects shares with Iran this tradition of within the Sufi movements, the mystical movements of South Asia. You see that presence of this idea is very profound. Yet whether they are Shi'is or not, they had inherited that tradition.
How important is the history of the Persian-speaking world, and how significant is it for Pakistan and for Pakistanis who are trying to understand their own history?
Exactly. You know, one of the drawbacks, one might say, of the rise of modern nationalist ideologies throughout the world, and certainly in the Islamic world, is that people unfortunately tend to forget about the shared memories or the shared traditions or the shared heritage that they have for a very long time enjoyed and thrived in these countries. They enjoyed it and it's thrived in these countries. South Asia and Iran had very long cultural as well as, of course, commercial and political ties that goes back to the early Islamic era and before that to pre-Islamic period, all the way through the Sasanian Empire and before that to the Persian Empire of the ancient times. This is a very, one would say, organic relationship between these two parts of the world. And as you might know, Persian has been a great language, a lingua franca of the entire Indian subcontinent prior to the early decades of the 19th century, during the colonial times. And therefore, many of the great scholars of this part of the world, that is today Pakistan, were great scholars of the Persian. They wrote most of their literature, their histories, their poetry was all produced, geography, everything was produced in Persian. Great example of it is Ghalib, as a poet. And another great example is Muhammad Iqbal, who has produced probably more poetry in Persian than in Urdu. But one should not, of course, undermine the significance of Urdu as a tradition. But these two languages are very closely intertwined, very closely in terms of their etymology, in terms of their expression, literary expressions. They have much in common. The themes that it appears in both of these literatures. So one task is for the newer generation of the Pakistanis to try to explore this world more fully, to try to see the interaction between these two cultures, as it is indeed the task of the Iranians, to try to learn more about the developments, literary, historical developments in Pakistan through the medium of Urdu. And that's unfortunate aspect is that in Iran, even fewer people know Urdu than in this country people would know Persian. So that's, I think, something that definitely needs to be addressed.
In your opinion, what is the importance of comparative liberal studies in Pakistan, especially for the youth of this country?
Well, it's again a very important question to bear in mind. As in the rest of the world, today we face the task of the universities is very much governed or dictated by a certain utilitarianism. People study subjects because it would give them an immediate benefit. You become a computer scientist, an electrical engineer, a medical doctor, or other fields that have a very practical, very immediate implication for them. Usually that means that in many instances people tend to ignore the importance of liberal arts, or what you may call liberal arts: literature, history, philosophy, religious studies, poetry, arts, architecture. These are things that even if you don't want to pursue them in a kind of a professional level, you still need to be exposed to it. That was what's always been the case in the past, and it has to be now part of the overall education. And therefore, comparative liberal studies here, for instance, in this university, may very well, or at least I'm hoping that serves that purpose, to try to disseminate, to help this kind of an education to be grasped and to be absorbed by the general student body as well as the specialists.
How crucial of a role can history and philosophy play for the future development of Pakistan's youth, since policymakers here put more emphasis on STEM studies?
Well, that's precisely what I was saying. You know, this is a big dilemma. Do you want only to produce technicians, or do you want to produce people who exercise certain fields of political science, or computer science, or engineering, or medicine, without knowing anything else? That, I think, is a great loss. That's against the original mission of a university. University is a place where someone comes not only to learn about a particular profession or a skill, but also to try to broaden the horizons, to try to learn more about where you're coming from, what is your collective memory as in the society. History is basically a collective memory of a society. Sometimes people come to me and say, what's the use of history? I say, well, there are certain things in the world that there is no use for them, but it's part and parcel of your psyche, your personality, your cultural identity, your national identity. If you don't know about this the things that has happened in the past to your society, or worldwide for that matter, or the whole region, therefore, as an individual, you don't have part of a memory. And how a person can function without a memory is the same as a society would function without a collective memory. So that's really the kind of an understanding that one should have as far as history is concerned. Other fields are the same. I mean, literature and poetry has a place in the personal development of the individual. You're a much better person if you have a certain understanding of that side of you as an individual, which deals with aspects of personal feeling, affections, love for the society, love for the others. And these are all part of what literature and poetry would tell you. As far as philosophy is concerned, it gives you a much more of a critical thinking, the same as history. It gives you a way that you think more critically about the world around you. You don't accept everything as in the face value. You always have a sense to try to question things and find your own judgment based on, that is educated judgment, based on what you have learned. So that's basically part of this liberal arts concept that tends to be further developed.
Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Amanat.
Thank you very much.
And that is all for tonight. Be sure to tune back in tomorrow. We will take you beyond the news.